You're not obviously you're not originally from Indonesia, right? Or
Oh, no,
you're
no. Shall I start the spiel now? It looks like it's recording.
oh yeah, I mean I already clicked record
Okay.
because we usually like just start and then
Okay.
figure it
Yeah.
out as we go.
No, I'm an American. I grew up in Virginia and went to school there. And then when I was like 20 something, I moved to New York and I lived there for almost 2 decades. Um, and then, yeah, my wife and I decided to seek adventure. Um, Partly, I'd saved up a bunch of money and wanted to start a little software as a service. And
Mhm.
so we were just trying to save a bit of money by moving to Southeast Asia. And COVID kind of threw a wrench in our plans.
Yeah.
So we didn't originally plan to come here at all. My wife studies Japanese, and she really wanted to pursue that. And so she went off to Japan in late December, in first year of the pandemic, I think. And then 2 days, the plan was I was going to pack up the apartment and I would follow up with her later. And 2 days after she arrived from Japan, they closed the borders to everybody, not just random tourists or people whose spouses had visas, but also like permanent residents, like people who were married to Japanese citizens could not get back in.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we kind of played it by ear, and every semester we'd reevaluate, and I'd be like, well, it's 3 months later. Can I get into Japan now? And the answer just kept being no, no, no. So we eventually decided to give up on Japan. We met in Portugal. We were there for 3 months. It was nice enough. And then we were looking at Southeast Asia. And we'd both been to Thailand many, many years ago. But Thailand, their tourist visa setup was, they had something called the special tourist visa for the pandemic, but it was so incredibly convoluted, almost nobody took it. So we looked at where we
special
could go.
tourist visa for pandemic, as in you can just go and visit when there is pandemic, or
So
wow.
if it had all worked out, we'd have been able to spend 9 months straight in Thailand, but that didn't work out. So we looked at where we could go, and Bali in Indonesia, it's a very tourism heavy place, and they were desperate. So they gave us a business visa. So I showed up and started working on my solo idea. And it was a terrible idea, so I had to kill it eventually. But now I'm working on a different one.
Hey, maybe I should do the introduction then now. It's like,
Sure.
The person you're listening to is Matthew. Welcome to Deaf and Number episode 88. Anyway, but so you were working already in the US, and then now you moved your business there, or what was the main reason then?
So I'm basically trying to start a software as a service, and I don't have any customers yet. And so living here is just a way to keep costs down while I build it.
Yeah.
That's the primary reason. We liked Indonesia a lot, but we also wanted to check out other places. The food in Thailand is clearly superior, but it's a little bit harder to stay here. So we're going to go back to Indonesia next week, and then hopefully we can get a special tech visa for Thailand and be able to stay here a little bit longer than what's allowed for tourists. It's all very convoluted and ever shifting. We'll see. A lot of the countries here have talked about digital nomad visas, but not too many of them have come through with that yet. But that being said...
Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say Bali is the easiest. There are essentially companies that exist to put you on the books and give you a business visa and claim you're an employee, even though you don't really do anything for them. So it makes it, and you can just kind of renew them for a long time. So it's very easy to stay in Bali. Not nearly as easy to stay in Thailand.
And is that it? Just, I mean, we're kind of off topic to start with. We're never on topic. We go. It's like if we hit the topic, it will be a miracle. But anyway, what I was going to ask you was, do you think all of these things are just still a hangover from the pandemic, or is it a general kind of way that the countries are organized?
Well, the hangover from the pandemic is them still kind of trying to get organized. So a lot of the tourism heavy places were really hit hard, like Bali in particular. The
Mm.
majority of the island its economy is dominated by tourism. They were
Mhm.
desperate to get people back.
Yeah.
I think at this point, it's back to business as usual, and the digital nomad visas are things they've been planning for a while.
Right. Right.
Generally speaking, a lot of the countries around here are of the opinion that as long as you're not taking work away from a local,
Mm.
they're more or less okay with you coming here and spending your money as long as you don't cause any problems.
Mm.
So, for example, Bali is in the news because a bunch of Russian and Ukrainians got into some motorcycle accidents, and now they're contemplating, banning foreigners from renting bikes, which, to
Oh
be
wow.
fair, is probably safer. But the Balinese are amazing bike riders, and I can't hope to touch their ability,
Well, how
especially
about
given that.
training rather than banning though? It's like because most of these things, like you have, like in like the UK or in Belgium, for example, you have to like qualify to ride a
Yeah,
bike or qualify to drive a car. Obviously VJ is going to tell me that that's all bullshit.
I think you can still do it as long as you get a Balinese driver's license. It's just that I don't think they're handing those out to tourists anymore. Like you have to be a long-term resident. I'm not
Oh,
too
right,
clear on the
I
okay.
mean,
details.
if Bali is pretty much like India, I would assume that the training and the test mean nothing once you get on the road. So there's no
Yeah,
relationship.
I was told when I got there that realistically, as long as you wear your helmet and don't get into an accident, you won't have any problems. And that, if the police might pull you over, but the fine is minimal. And it's
Hmm.
possible they're actually just looking for a bribe. I never
Yeah,
personally encountered any of that, so I don't
Yeah.
know for sure.
yeah.
I don't want to disparage the Balinese authorities and have some government official who also dabbles in closure on the side deny me entry.
Yeah, I mean,
But
you really shouldn't, because the whole, Bali, the entire island, basically listen to this podcast like every day. So
Oh, yeah.
that's
That's our
one of
hotspot. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. That's the biggest demographic that we have. So please don't offend any Bali people.
yeah,
But I should actually balance this out a little bit by saying that it's definitely not just India or Asia, because I remember when I first went on holiday to Ibiza, which, a young man, you go on holiday to Ibiza. Anyway, I hired a motorbike, as you do, to explore the island. And I came off it within like 2 minutes, scraped my knees
Mhm.
up, wasn't wearing any helmets, anything like that. I was like, oh, carry on. It's like, and it was fine, Someone else in the group, there was like 6 of us, I think, and someone else came off as well. But it wasn't, it's just the scrapes, really, So
yeah,
didn't get involved in too many crashes.
yeah. I'm lucky.
Zero training, basically start, turn the throttle, hit the brake. That's it.
Well,
That.
yeah, I mean, I took a day's worth of training, but I was nowhere near prepared by the time I actually had my bike.
What? Okay.
Um, the state of Balinese, I mean, there's really not much in the way of like road infrastructure outside
Hmm.
of the main city, Denpasar. It's like every road is back roads. It's dangerous
Uh,
to even walk. So there's these. It's not laid out anything like a grid. It's very much so a lot of traffic gets concentrated on very key roads,
hmm.
and when you're trying to travel parallel to the beach in certain areas, you have to go through what are colloquially called shortcuts, and these are essentially
Mm.
like concrete platforms like 5 feet above the ground passing through rice paddies, and they're super narrow,
Oh
and if
my.
you can't, there's no shoulder on the side, so what happens is
Yeah.
you will
Yeah.
simply fall 5 feet into a rice paddy, and good luck getting whatever your vehicle is out of that.
Oh my God.
um, um, the
Okay. It's a high
worst were
wire
the
act just to get to the beach.
yeah.
But and the guardrails are like tests in your software. Is it that why that you wrote a blog post saying, "Hey, how tests are gonna, mess up your design?" They're like, no
Yeah,
Yeah.
guardrails.
yeah,
You should know how to drive.
You can go faster with no guardrails. Yeah.
right, right. It's the Empire style of road design. Notice how they never have any guardrails in Star Wars, and everybody's always falling off. Same philosophy.
leave this little kind of minor thing. No one will ever get it. They'll never work out how to hit this very specific little point that will blow up the entire star. Leave that open. Yeah.
And they will never know about this. Anyway, yeah.
So yeah, we took a little bit of time to travel and then hit Thailand, and the food is better. It's a little more walkable. We would like to stay here if possible, but we'll see.
And whereabouts are you in the Thailand?
The original digital nomad place, Chiang Mai. Unfortunately, our timing is terrible. We're here in what's colloquially called the burning season, where a lot of the agriculture here is slash and burn. So when the fields are done to get the nutrients back, they just set it on fire. Bali did the same, but apparently it's really bad up here, and the pollution is just staggering.
I think we had the same thing in the north west of India, like near Delhi and that place. During the season, basically they burned all the things, and then because Delhi is already crazy populated with pollution anyway, so there is a thick layer of pollution on that level that even the smoke can't penetrate that layer. So it's
my God.
everything is just like it's like a local sealed dome of carbon dioxide and all these gases that people suffer like crazy.
It's something similar because of the mountains here. They concentrate the pollution. It's like a can't escape.
Yeah. Actually, I was in Barcelona recently, and apparently the air quality in Barcelona is really low, really poor because of the mountains that are around it, that it sort of ends up trapping all the pollution that comes off the vehicles. And it just can't escape. It's just so trapped by the huge mountains on the side. So yeah, it was a bit weird. Yeah.
It's really anti-climatic, right? Because in India, the mountains basically stop, and they're the ones causing the seasons and monsoons and everything in India, because the colder air is being stopped by the mountains, and then it bounces back, and then we have 2 monsoon seasons because of that one. They were very... I mean, that is the reason why we have 2 growing seasons, especially in the northern regions of India that is so fertile, because the mountains, Himalayas, are basically blocking this sea air coming from east and west from the sea. And that's why we have the nice monsoon seasons and then growing seasons. And now they're also the reason why all the pollution is being blocked and, fucking up everybody who's living there, which is, sad.
Anywho. I don't know what to think about.
I think those are bigger problems than not having tests in your softwares. I think it's
I mean, I was listening to Zach's podcast when you interviewed Telman. Part of his prep for this, I'm like, I should probably know what my predecessor said on this podcast. And he was mentioning Brett Victor, and Brett Victor is partly an inspiration for what I'm doing now, or rather, not inspiration is the wrong word, but more like the impetus. So I like doing, very abstract, high-level programming. It's part of what drew me to Clojure. But at the same time, like, the part of me that's concerned about, the state of the environment in the world is also concerned about, like, software efficiency. Like, how many cycles are we just burning and wasting? Some of this is things like I refuse to really participate in proof of work cryptocurrency because I consider it almost an unethical use of electricity at this point. But I've also been thinking about, how can we cut down on the cycles we use when stop wasting energy in the CPU.
So stop all AI, basically.
Yeah.
Sorry, but yeah.
I'm not sure about that leap, but
well, it's a very crypto-like waste of energy in many ways. Doesn't seem to have many good use cases. But okay, let's put that one till the end. Okay.
I don't know what we're gonna.
I think maybe it's please go ahead. I'm fine if you want to talk about AI. That's good. I mean, that's something that's the burning topic these days. I mean, literally burning the planet topic.
Yeah. I was playing around with some of the stable diffusion stuff recently. It's definitely wild what you can get it to do. Have you guys messed around with it yet?
Yeah.
It's
mean, all I do
It's
is just ask for give me an image of my dog doing something. My dog's race doing something, and then it just gives me some weird looking wonky dog, and I get bored, and then I move on.
mhm.
Well, we're all prompt engineers on Defen now. Yeah. Fully certified prompt engineers.
Yeah,
I was trying to get it to generate a business logo.
yeah,
And I had very mixed results with that, but it did generate something interesting. And in the interest of time, I just kept it rather than keep fooling around with it. But
yeah.
I have a whole bunch of publishing and art friends back in New York who are convinced the sky is falling. He's an anxious fellow, so he's convinced the sky is falling anyway. But
He's probably right,
they're
though,
worried.
in fairness. Yeah.
But there is certain types of, I mean, either images or text that can certainly be generated using this one, right? I did try a couple of things with the new Chat GPT-4 because we are all technical people. So, well, at least I keep asking technical questions like, how do you deploy a Helm chart into Kubernetes? And it keeps just giving an example of either Nginx or WordPress. Then you can literally see it just read it from there. And I'm like, no, not WordPress. I just want generic Helm chart installation. Like, no, this is how you're going to install Nginx again. Like, no. So I
Yeah,
think it's not that for that kind of use cases, probably.
it's like a very sophisticated parrot at the moment.
Yeah.
The problem is the technology is just going to get better and better. I was just reading about universities being terrified that
Yeah.
It wasn't just they're terrified of plagiarism by the use of ChatGPT. A bunch of researchers submitted an article on the ethics of AI, and they had it written by ChatGPT, and it passed peer review.
And it was accepted. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I really miss not having like a GPT when I was doing my MBA, because they asked like write 2,200 words on something, and because I'm an engineer, and I prefer writing like bullet points, like 4 of them, and then that's it. I don't need to fill it up with words. And like, God damn it, 1,800 mark. I have to reach 1,800 mark somehow. And then you keep adding like, and furthermore, based on the previous paragraph, keep adding these filler words and everything. Jesus. I think all these kind of things will be super confusing for people who are driving their education based on writing essays and writing these things. Man, that's going to be shitty.
The thing is, like, plagiarism in higher education has already been like a really big problem for a while anyway, though. There's before ChatGPT, there's been like, essay mills where you can just pay to have somebody write an essay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, real quick. I went to school for computer science, but I was also really interested in the mind. So after a few years at startups, I moved up to New York City and started volunteering at a lab that studied emotion and memory. And eventually I became a research assistant, and then I became a grad student at Columbia doing cognitive neuroscience for consciousness. And as part of that, I had to TA a course every year. And I found that rather depressing, because this is essentially, an Ivy League institution. The students here are supposed to be some of the best in the country. And I can't count the number of like, plagiarism and cheating. And I found it very depressing because I always came from a model that education is not just about attaining credentials. It's about, learning something. And then the most egregious example I came across was somebody who copied a paragraph out of Wikipedia. And I had enough other stuff to do as a grad student, and we didn't have sophisticated anti-plagiarism detection tools at the time. I found out they copied a paragraph from Wikipedia because they didn't change the font or the background color. So in the middle of this essay of like black on white is this gray paragraph with a different font. And I'm like, well, this looks suspicious. So I Googled the words involved, and the first thing it turned up was Wikipedia. I reported it to the professor, but the professor, he was an adjunct who enjoyed teaching, and I don't think he really wanted to like get involved with the dean or helicopter parents or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know what came of
it.
I
think that the incentives are wrong, right? Maybe that is the reason. Like the people who are getting into the education are not getting for the as you mentioned, like because they have interest in something or because they want to learn more about something. It's fairly, everything is rigged towards, oh, this is a career path. Everything is linked to a career path. Like that's super
Mm-hmm.
annoying. And
But even
I
if
mean,
you
on
don't,
the
even
other
if you
side,
don't,
like, yeah,
I was going to say, even if you don't take that attitude, it's super expensive in the US to be
yeah,
educated. So
That's
yeah,
very true.
if you don't pass, then there's a huge cost of failure. So I think that's another problem with incentives over there. Like over here in Belgium, it's like 1,000 a year.
yeah.
It used to be like that in the US like 50 years ago.
I'll give you an example, right? Like I'm doing my psychology degree as a part-time thing from UK. So I finished half of it,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought because I'm a Dutch citizen now, I'm going to apply to University of Amsterdam because it's closer, and I would like to do it in the Netherlands. And they tell me, okay, go through this exam to entry, and then I have to prove that I can study in English by taking an English test,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I have to prove that I said, look, I have a bachelor of electronics engineering. Basically, I know some basic calculus, and that's not a problem. They're like, no, you have to take an exam to prove that you have the elementary mathematical understanding and English. I'm like, dude, I just did my MBA, like 2 years of writing shit in English and then passing in the Netherlands, not even any other country. 50 kilometers from your university. They're like, no, that's not
Right.
accepted. You have to go through some, I don't know, TOEFL or one of these exams and apply that one. Okay, you know what? I
Right.
finished half of the psychology degree. Is that worth anything? Like, nah, no, no, not really. So take the exam, take these
Yeah.
2 exams, then you apply. I'm like, come on, man. This is okay, fine. I guess, I'm going to go through this charade. Like,
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense because I think it's like they don't want to make any exceptions, nothing. Everybody falls through the same thing, and then you just do this. Like, okay. And I'm not trying to be a psychologist or a neuroscientist. I'm just studying because I'm interested in this shit.
Right.
I can't make a career out of it being a therapist. I'd rather write shitty closure code than just stay in that,
What
that domain.
what in
Yeah.
psychology were you interested in studying?
Well, I mean, it was just like a reading all the pop sci books initially from all the the general New York Times sort of books, and then now I thought,
Right.
okay, I want to get a bit more into uh, biological psychology side. But then the
Uh-huh.
first degree is always going to be a holistic approach, right? So it's going to be more about both bio, social, and psycho thing, the whole area. So I'm not sure what the I don't have any big goal like I don't want to become a therapist or anything, but I just picked
Hmm.
up something like psychology and counseling, and that's what I'm going to do. So I just finished like I don't know around half the course in the bachelor's degree, and
Okay.
then I thought, okay, I'm going to switch to something else because it's going to be closer and it's a nice university and it's going to be fun to do this. They're like, fuck, you need to do all these exams. Like, Jesus,
Yeah.
god damn it! It's
I mean,
that's another
there's
weird part.
so many things wrong with academia. Obviously, I'm not
Yeah,
still an
yeah,
academic, even though I was working on a
yeah, yeah,
PhD,
yeah.
um, which actually it leads into my closure origin story. Um,
Exactly.
I
That's what I was
was,
about to ask. Like, how did you come from? You
yeah.
started from this, and then yeah, yeah,
So some of it was I was unhappy with academia in general. I felt that like what we were learning in terms of perceptual awareness and consciousness was very far away from answering things like the hard problem of consciousness, like what makes red red, like what is the experience of red. Like I can
yeah,
say stuff like, well, there's associated activations in, area V4, which is the low level color area in the visual system. And that's not really, very satisfying. Um, some of it was I saw my advisor writing grants like mad, trying to get tenure, and it looked pretty unpleasant. Some of
Mm.
it was that my data wasn't doing so hot, and so I was like, well, do I want to just become, some professor in some random college town somewhere in the middle of America? I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm kind of tied to New York at the time. Um, but what really the moment that the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, I was with some collaborators in the Netherlands at in Nijmegen, actually, Radboud University, and
yeah,
it
yeah,
was like
yeah,
the perfect environment, just like free scanner time. no teaching demands. It was the summer. It was everything was perfect, and I still wasn't really happy. And for my then girlfriend's birthday, I decided to mess around with this new language I'd been hearing about. So this would have been around 2010, I guess, 2009, 2010, somewhere around then. I'd have to like double check. I had been, I'd come from like computers, and I was still reading Hacker News, and I'd come across many of Paul Graham's essays, and I took a look at ARC, and that wasn't really going anywhere. And so the other Clojure was the big up and coming list that was available. And so I wrote her a program that would take any sentence you give it and display the words like a crossword puzzle, assuming that the word could be laid out like that. And I did that like, one weekend for her birthday. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, I need to leave academia and probably return. So,
oh my God.
But it would actually take many more years before I would work in Clojure full time. I did a whole bunch of other stuff.
But you were originally, you were originally trained in programming and computer science, or
yes.
How did you?
I have a degree in computer science from UVA. I graduated in '99, and I went to work for a couple startups. They did not make me filthy rich. And then I was sick of being in Virginia, and a lot of my friends had moved to New York, so I went there, entered academia. So I leave academia, and also my girlfriend broke up with me that same summer. And so all of a sudden I have like no ties
after
to anything.
After that Clojure program as well. I mean, that's a harsh review.
Yeah. So first thing I did was go on a long meditation retreat for a month and a half. And then I came back to New York and started working as a consultant. And all my time in academia was spent with MATLAB, and I absolutely loathe MATLAB. But it is very popular, especially in neuroscience. The dominant open source packages are all written in MATLAB. And so I didn't want to do that, and I basically had to fall back on my earlier era of the web, which was essentially PHP. So I took a few jobs with that, and of course I wasn't really happy doing it. And at a certain point, between gigs, I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to take another job until it's in Clojure. And I kind of responded at random to the CEO of a startup called Swarmify, which is a ClojureScript startup. They're still around. I eventually had to leave because of the lead funder got a little weird and cut funding. So that kind of sucked. But in the middle of my time working at Swarmify, I kind of drunkenly responded to one of David Nolan's tweets on a Friday night. So he had a co-working group called Kitchen Table Coders. And it inhabited some loft in like Brooklyn. And I looked it up, and it was only like, a 15-minute walk from where I was living in a different loft in Brooklyn. And so I'm like, I need a place, because I can't work at home. I've been doing remote work for like forever. And I just cannot get anything done in the house. It's not about having like a home office. It's just about like the temptation. Like I can just leave my home office and I could be playing the Switch or talking to my wife. Any of these other things I could be doing. So for me, I always have to like go to a coffee shop or just get out. And so I started working at Kitchen Table Coders, and I got to know David. And as I was wrapping up, David was working on the Danish tax project, which I believe, Vijay, you might know about because you used to work at Flexiana. We had a bunch of Flexiana guys come through there.
Yes.
You have that look in your eyes that says, "Oh yes, I've heard about this project."
I've heard about it, and because Cognitect, when it was essentially becoming Nubank, and they wanted to offload these projects to some other companies. Usually, I think so. They wanted to interview me, and then I did the interview with few folks, and then I decided, well, this project is not for me. This is really bureaucratic Danish government thingy. And if I look up the history of the project, it's I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do this. So I backed off, and then like, no, I'm not gonna. And also because they said I need to be in Copenhagen pretty frequently or something. I thought
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna do that. I mean, I'm not gonna fly from Netherlands and then every week or 2 days, whatever.
Right.
So I decided, no, I'm not gonna do this. So as a
That makes
yeah, it
sense.
was a fun project. Yeah,
It had a lot of turnover, is a polite way of
yeah,
putting
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But yeah, David suggested I interview with Cognitect. I didn't really technically interview with Cognitect. They brought me on as I mean, I did have an interview, but I wasn't not to be an employee. I was essentially an outside consultant brought in to essentially augment their staffing. And in fact, like, I mean, that project had to have had at least 3 or 4 different agencies because it just required so many people.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that was lucrative if bureaucratic and frustrating in some ways, but the people were good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's usually never the people, right? I mean, people are always fun. I mean, I'll if I look back every good project or the bad project, it's usually the style of the requirements. It's usually the style of the management. Or other than that, with the team, there was never an issue. I mean, the team, there is always
Yeah.
fun, good people sitting together, trying to solve something. So I think the intention in every project is good, but usually it's done by managed by something in a weird way or rewriting some shit for the sake of rewriting, and geez, all sorts of weird shit shows up. And yeah,
Well, let's say I've never been on a project before that had switched databases. Like, I always heard about that as a theoretical thing, but realistically, I always assumed, yeah, changing your database seems like such an incredible pain and risk that I'd never seen it happen before. And for that project, it had actually happened 3 times.
3 times.
Yeah, and
wow.
also I think
Okay.
and it's not switching from, let's switch from Postgres to MySQL, right? It's like a paradigm shifting database shift. So like
No,
you're
they
going
started
from
off.
something.
Yeah, before me, it was Datomic on Cassandra, and then they found that's kind of slow. So then they ditched Datomic and went with Cassandra. They found reads were slow because Cassandra is designed for write ingestion.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then for a brief shining moment, we were just going to use boring Postgres. But then for legal reasons, it was determined that a lot of the case data had to be stored with this other vendor known to the Danes called WorkZone or something like that. And so we essentially had like a split database. We were storing half of it through Microsoft OData calls to this other database, and then half of it was an event system stored in Postgres. And let's say I learned not to do that in future endeavors.
Hey, there is always learning in every project. And I mean, I remember when I was in this process of talking to them, like I asked, how is the development environment like? And once that was explained to me, I was like, no, I can't deal with these many weird shit floating around. Some Postgres I need to connect to. I cannot have anything locally, and yeah. Anyway,
But zooming out a little bit, though, I think what I find
Yeah.
interesting about this is that it's like whenever we're doing closure stuff, it's that's the nice part about any project. It's all this other stuff around it where you discover the architecture's wrong, the database is wrong, or the connectivity is wrong, or the thing that you're trying to build is just not actually needed by the business, or it doesn't meet some requirement. These are the kind of things which kind of like make everyone miserable, essentially. Was that your experience as well? Essentially, that it's like, because I think that's what you're sort of a little bit inferring, VJ, is like the building thing, like the making of the thing is usually because engineers like essentially get told what the requirements are and then just do their best to make it happen, and that's the fun part. It's all this kind of like higher level stuff that is essentially a problem.
It's difficult because it's difficult for me to accept as somebody who thinks and feels very strongly about the language I use. But that's actually really a small part of what makes success in a project.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, people have been writing great stuff, low-level stuff in C for decades.
In every
C,
yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's a difference between and for me at least anyway, was writing stuff in C or Java or whatever, and experiencing a much more expressive, like, yeah, I would say that a more joyful way of writing programs in Clojure than you can in these other languages. So I think that's the difference. Because I mean, in the end, it doesn't matter what the language is, you'll get it right or wrong, that's for sure. But as a sort of participant in the process, I much prefer doing it in Clojure than in other languages.
Oh, for sure. I forget which study it was, but they were talking about programmer happiness, and Go and Clojure routinely rank very high on those metrics. And I've been thinking about, well, what actually unifies those two languages in terms of programmer happiness? Because they seem at the surface very different. It can't be the use of communicating sequential processes or anything like that. I think it has to do with the very tight feedback loops involved, because Go has a notoriously fast compiler to the point that you can kind of explore, like, the compiler errors you get in an almost REPL-like manner. It can happen that fast. And then obviously Lisp do have a REPL, and so you can do that kind of exploratory programming. And people talk about this, but I actually feel like that's kind of an undersold superpower of, really high quality REPLs like the Lisps have. And maybe Smalltalk had this as well. I've been curious, but I've never played around with Smalltalk. And I think it's because there's just so much less to keep in mind when you have a very tight feedback loop. There's fewer things that can go wrong, and anything that does go wrong, it's much easier to identify what went wrong and fix it. Because essentially, the longer between when you create an error and when you fix it, the more things you have to keep in memory, more things that could possibly be the cause of your problem.
Yeah.
That's obviously,
well said.
Yeah. Obviously, something that makes
but
it
as a counterexample, or maybe just a point of an argument, don't you think it's the similar way if you have quote unquote sound programs in the languages like Haskell or some other way where you can tighten the program with types, and that part is going to work, so you can focus on the other part. I'm talking about how much stuff that I need to keep in my mind when I'm working on a piece of code. Like with Clojure, as you're mentioning, I can quickly bounce back between different things. But isn't it that, don't you think it's the same principle applies in the other situations?
So I'm not totally sure. Well, so I haven't really done any Haskell programming. I can't really comment on what it is like as an experience. The impression I get from, like generally, Clojurists are not going to find it too controversial to say that, like, obviously types can't solve all of your problem. Every bug you've ever written has made it through the type system. It's an open question, and obviously, if you're getting the business logic wrong, you may or may not be able to encode that in types. Or I can't actually say about Haskell. I do think, though, that types add an extra burden on the working memory system, and I'm not actually sure if it's working memory that's even really the issue. So every so often I'll try to, like, marry my two major experiences. The cognitive neuroscience side and, like, the programmer side. And there is shockingly little written about that. Very few people have truly explored the psychology of writing code. There has been some stuff written, and it's almost always for newcomers. What is the process by which newbies start to learn to write code? And some of it is, they'll analyze, like, the corpus of code written in GitHub and try to make inferences from that. But in terms of actually being like, what's going through your head when you're writing code, there's very little written about that.
But do you think, like, programming needs to be added to DSM 8 or something, that this is going to be one of the
I think a lot of us have something wrong with us, for sure. Something ain't right.
I'm going to check everything. Yeah, exactly. Then it's a very specific way of thinking or processes happening in the brain to become a programmer.
But don't you think it's an interesting question in the sense that when people are designing languages, they very rarely have this idea of joy in their mind. they're trying often to solve one thing. I mean, I know Matt's famously says that Ruby is for programmer joy, but can he prove that? I don't know. I mean, obviously a lot of Rubyists think that it's a kind of like, let's say, lived experience is true, but I've done Ruby and I don't think it's that joyful. But
it was. It was if you're coming from Java and then first time you build a Ruby on Rails application, you're like, holy crap, this is amazing.
That's Ruby on Rails,
what I've been doing with
J2EE.
and no, but you're starting with, the Rails way of building is enabled by the features in the language, like all the monkey patching that you can do, all the syntactical things that you could do, the whole active record stuff, and all this is enabled by the language.
I understand
features,
that,
right?
but my point is that programming Ruby per se is not. It wasn't specifically joyful for me. I mean, I dropped out before Ruby on Rails, so that's a different way of programming something.
That's a really interesting point, because then joy is a subjective experience, right? So I cannot design for your joy. So how would somebody design a programming language? It's easier to say I'm going to design.
No, but my point is that he explicitly said that was something that he was going for, But the interesting question to me, moreover, is like, can it even be true? Can the act of programming ever bring any joy? I mean, maybe that's to your point, Matthew.
I think the answer is definitely yes. There's a long literature on, what's called flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. I'm totally butchering his name. But he's, studied the concept of flow, like being in the zone, mostly in terms of things like music performance and athletics. And I don't know if anybody's really looked at that in coding, but I definitely feel in the zone sometimes. What I find, really interesting is, why does it take so long to get into that? Like, if I sit down at my laptop and I start coding, like I've got to open this, I got to open these tabs, and I've got to like review this documentation, and what was I doing here? Oh yes, I need to like look at the bookmarks I saved and double check that. And it can take like a good 20 to 30 minutes before I've really settled in, and then like I can code with maximal performance, and I feel like I am in the zone. And then sometimes the hours can just fly by when you're doing that.
Yeah.
And I would love to see what exactly affects that. For example, to the extent that, so it can't possibly be working memory that we're relying on, because working memory itself is super, super limited. There's a very famous psych paper by Jordan Miller, I think, called The Magic Number 7 plus or minus 2 being the number of things that we can hold in memory. And that's actually the number of chunks that can be held in memory. And it turns out later research shows it's even lower than that. It's more like 5 plus or minus 1. But we don't actually hold everything we're doing in working memory. So I think it's more about prepping the parts of the brain that are going to be called on, sort of like spreading activation by thinking about something. You are prepping it to be used as necessary. And I'm not exactly clear how it all plays. A lot of it is, below the surface. It's subconscious. But to the extent that I think, working memory is taxed at all, I keep fantasizing that one day I will get around to writing an Emacs plugin that actually keeps track of the number of free variables at any given line. And it will highlight the line based on how many free variables there are. And it gets progressively, redder and more alarming looking as you keep adding names that you have to keep track of. And I don't know where global variables would fit with this, but
hey, that's a nice segue into my question. Like, do you use Emacs or some other shit? Apparently, it looks like it's only Emacs.
No, I used to use Emacs. I stopped because this was back in
because it was fucking awful. Yeah, sorry. Okay.
No. There's things I love about Emacs and things I loathe about Emacs. Yeah. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. I stopped because I was doing this during the Swarmify days, and it was all 90% closure script. And Cider had some sort of weird closure script issue for a month that was driving me crazy. And I just switched to IntelliJ and Cursive. And I just haven't bothered to switch off yet. And it's been helpful, especially for Java interop, which I've been doing more of lately. There's an awful lot of that in Aleph.
But coming back to your point though about the free variables and stuff, are you talking about the number of let bindings that you have, or the number of vars, or what? maybe it's just
Yeah.
so I can like interpret it.
No. You have the right interpretation. Let binding would be obviously more salient because they're local. But technically, any global var could theoretically be relevant. But I think intuitively, like our brain is somehow discarding most of those because they're just not relevant. So yeah, I think it would be a cool Emacs plugin. I have no idea if it would actually reveal any deep insights into how programmers code. But it would be interesting because it does match some of our intuitive understanding that shorter functions are easier to understand, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I do think you're right that, I mean, basically, if you're operating on inputs to a function and you're having some let bindings and you're doing some actions and then you return some values and it's all kind of like right there on the page in like 10 lines or 20 lines, that is so much more grokkable than these side-effecting systems. And I think maybe functional programming in general, if you kind of like stick to that pattern, will be sort of, let's say, more comfortable in the brain,
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I don't know if you feel like that.
Yeah, pure functions are obviously much easier to reason about, and I mean, going by that working memory example, that you could say the answer is, well, that once the function is returned, there's nothing else you need to keep in mind about that function. It hasn't somehow screwed over another function in another thread somewhere else. Anyway, this is just my pet theory.
But honestly, this is huge. I mean, when you do Java interop, you realize that you're looking at some frameworks, Amazon frameworks or Spring or whatever, and the side effects fucking everywhere, and it's really difficult to grok what the hell is going on, and I find that incredibly stressful, to be honest. And it's one of the reasons why I don't like Java anymore or those kind of like non-functional programming environments, because it just hurts my head too much. Going back to the joy aspect of things, that is misery. That is immiserating to me. Maybe we can argue what joy is, but I know what misery looks like.
Right.
So the joy is absence of that misery.
Well, I'd like to think it's a bit more than that, but at least like, I know what pain is. So.
Closure is the programming equivalent of stop banging your head against the wall.
Yeah, I like there's this like Sam Harris like concept. Sam Harris is somewhat discredited in general, I think, as a neuroscientist, but he has this idea of like that joy is the absence of pain, or that our goal in life is to reduce the amount of pain in the world. I mean, I think this is all horseshit, frankly, but I would certainly say that like the idea that absence of pain does not equal joy. That's for sure. Right. So I think there's something more, but I definitely think that there are situations where you definitely experience misery and upset, and like I said, that's side affecting things in general and free variables and all these things where you have to play a computer more. Those are things which I think like erode joy pretty quickly.
Oh, for sure.
And that's coming back to Brett Victor, actually, isn't it? That you were talking about right at the beginning. How Brett Victor is saying we want to try and use the computers to let them play a computer, let them be computer, and let us reveal through systems, through work, what is important and interesting.
Right. I wasn't thinking about. I haven't seen that one in a long time. The Brett Victor inspiration for what I'm working on now is more about. He built this whole website for exploring ideas for saving the environment.
Oh, okay. Yes,
that was the one in particular I was thinking of. Then there's inventing from first principle. That's the interactivity one, right?
The inventing on principle. Yeah,
inventing on principle. Yeah,
that's the one I'm referring to. Yeah.
Sweet. Sam Harris said that joy is the absence of pain.
No. He said that if you want to like work out what should we say, what a non-Christian version of morality is, then it's about reducing pain in the world.
Oh,
or kind of
that
like
sounds a bit.
That sounds more reasonable.
I don't think that was the. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking from the purely Hindu version of it. I mean, it's more about accepting the pain rather than actually, I don't know, trying to remove the pain from the world, because we all also taught like, oh, everything is Maya, so fuck it. So,
Right. Well,
that's
the
another
Buddhist
school of
perspective,
thought.
the
I
Buddhist
think
perspective would be that
Yeah.
pain is mandatory, but suffering is optional.
Yeah.
There's like the actual pain you experience, and then there's all the extra that you heap on in your head.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the
Maybe that's the Eastern.
I think it's like a lot of it ends up being a sort of debate bro type argument where you put some like planks on the bottom like that, and then you end up saying Islam is terrible, and it's like, hang on, mate, so you've carefully constructed this sort of these set of planks, and then you're now criticizing a religion or a group or whatever.
That's bullshit.
And I think that's the thing that I didn't like about his argumentation, really, is that you kind of work on this like difficult to argue principle that pain is bad, but you can't automatically leap from that to certain activities that in some subjective manner might cause some pain to some people is bad.
Well, I think what we're trying to do is pain is bad, and then switch to closure is better. just leap from pain is bad to closure is better.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is. Yeah, that is exactly what it is.
There's a tagline to increase adoption: closure beats pain.
I like it. Less pain with closure. Yeah. It's like the anodyne of programming, or what do you call it in America, where you have these like headache tablets, paracetamol or something.
Oh, yeah.
The paracetamol of programming. It's not the panacea, but it's paracetamol.
Right. We call it acetaminophen for some reason. I have no idea why.
Oh. Ibuprofen, maybe? Is that an international?
Yeah. I think
the other generic names are standardized, but for some reason it's paracetamol in most of the world and acetaminophen in the United States.
Okay.
I can't explain that.
Damn stupid, what is it? Non-metric system, I guess.
I like knowing how many furlongs are in a pint, though.
It is.
Anyway, but so going back to your closure journey.
Back to joy. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So, are you still working on the Danish project, or that was part of the journey?
So, yeah, Cognitech wrapped up their involvement shortly after the new bank acquisition was announced. They pretty much wound down all of their consulting, and I stuck with them for another over half a year. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next, but no, I left that right around the same time. So almost a year ago now, a little over a year ago. It was right when I left Indonesia. I left that project. And so what I had been working on all of last year is, I don't know how much your listeners want to hear about starting up a software as a service versus
we
closure.
Definitely want to hear about this, of course.
Okay,
of course.
Well, it's definitely a bit of a stretch. I've always enjoyed coding, and I was always a little skeptical of those marketing and sales guys. But I find myself in the position of having to learn a lot of that stuff. So the first most painful lesson I learned last year is you need to find the problem before you write the solution. And I think a lot of engineers who go solo have this exact problem because we fall in love with the way we think things should be, and we have the technical chops to make that happen. So in my case, I have terrible hearing. I was, born absolute crap for hearing, and I've worn hearing aids for a long, long time, and I pretty much watch everything with subtitles. And when I was in the middle of the Danish project, I started like a little side venture, not really venture, a side project to start to bring that technology to the browser. So, for example, YouTube has like a closed caption button you can click it and it'll show captions. It'll even machine learning generate them if they don't exist yet. Microsoft Teams has a button you can push and it'll try to caption everybody in your team. So, the technology for that is there. They've been offered of cloud services for a few years now. And I thought, okay, well, I'll just like take any audio source running through the browser, uh, do a live transcription of this, and stream it as subtitles to be displayed. And I was working on this, on nights and weekends because I still had my day job and
Mm-hmm.
my wife and friends and all sorts of other things going on. And my old boss from Swarmify came back one day and said, "Matthew, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "You're sorry about what? Did you see the announcement?" So Google basically announced they were going to add that for free as part of Chrome, as part of their accessibility measures.
Yeah.
What I was building was actually going to be a little bit nicer because I was doing segmentation technology to figure out when and where to display it. So what Chrome does is just an endlessly scrolling wall of text. And what I was going to do would be more like traditional movie subtitles. So it would be
Oh,
less
yeah,
of a
yeah.
cognitive load, but it would have only been like a few percent better and probably nobody would have wanted it. So I shelved that for a bit. And then last year, I started thinking about another idea I'd had, which is a way to improve transcription accuracy by essentially looking at multiple sources and then looking at where they differ. So I figured it was the kind of thing that the really big companies like Microsoft and Amazon couldn't easily do because it would involve having multiple teams all write the same models and then do like majority vote. So if 2 out of 3 transcriptions agree on a word, that's the word you go with. And then the odd one just gets tossed. And this would actually work to improve accuracy as long as their errors weren't correlated. But because they're coming from different companies, which is the way I was building this, essentially we talk to Google, Azure, and AWS and compare their outputs. To the extent that they weren't correlated, it would work out really well. And mathematically, I'd have been able to eliminate about 40% of the errors, existing errors in transcription. The problem I ran into was, even though this would have worked, nobody cared. So, I started
Damn it.
forcing myself to actually do the customer research part that many startups want to avoid.
Yeah.
But I started talking to people who use machine learning transcription tech or even human transcription tech, and they kind of fell into 2 camps. One camp were the people who had super high accuracy needs. We're talking fields like medical fields, legal fields. They've done transcription for a long, long time, and they have like specialist human transcriptions who finish it, and they need very high accuracy because you get something wrong, somebody will overdose on their drugs or get sued.
Yeah.
The other camp were people who were using it for whatever. Maybe they were transcribing their notes, maybe they were like keeping minutes from a meeting, and the
This
occasional.
podcast.
Yeah. Do you offer transcriptions of this podcast? By the
No,
way,
not really, because no.
Shame.
Wait. I did try the Amazon recognition thing a few, I think last year, 2 years ago. It was shit. I mean, it couldn't understand my accent, obviously, and then raised. And every time we say closure, it's closure, and God, and
They
all
have a
the
lot of problems with accents.
yeah, and all the bleeping stuff that we say that it can't try, it can't put the thing out, and But actually, 2 days ago, Dieter, I think, on Mastodon, he mentioned he was using some service to do the transcription. It was pretty reasonable, and there is also an open source one called Mac Whisper or Mac Whisper. I'm just that's on my to-do list to try, but anyway, that's as an aside.
I think, if you're looking for one, rev.com was a competitor that seemed to be pretty good.
No, we'll just use yours, so no worry. Yeah.
Well, I shelved it, unfortunately. But the people for whom they don't need like super high accuracy, they just didn't care. Like if it was with a clean recording, they were probably, and no accents, they were probably going to get something in the range of 95% plus accuracy. And whether I moved the needle to 97% accuracy, they just didn't care. So I eventually set that aside and started thinking about other stuff. And for a few years now, I've kept an idea journal, on and off, mostly off, but I do just keep any random idea, just write it down, and many of them are absolutely terrible. And in fact, in order to get a lot of them out there, you have to have plenty of terrible ideas. But some of the good ones will resurface. I got this
Mm.
idea from what's his name? Not Derek Sivers. I'll figure it out later. But he
Mm.
suggested this, and one of the ideas I had to do with performance testing. Um, so, and this kind of came back to like wanting to do something for the environment, and also finding something that I feel like is kind of neglected, and wanting not to waste CPU cycles, even though I'm using a high level language. I also like making things randomly efficient.
Yeah.
Upgrading my packages in the hopes that it'll be faster. Uh,
Yeah.
I can't explain that. It's some sort of weird little compulsion. Um,
Yeah.
but so I thought, well, why aren't people keeping track of their performance budgets? You know,
Mm.
at a high level, everybody knows they should. And for something to be interactive, it has to happen in less than like a tenth of a second. If you look at web pages, like every 100 milliseconds added before the web page is ready means X amount of lost revenue or whatever. If you're
Mm.
e-commerce
Mm.
and stuff like that, but virtually nobody does that. At least not at like the levels I've worked at, small and medium businesses for the most part. And
Mm.
my thought was, well, why not just turn the unit test into performance test? It really shouldn't be that
Oh.
hard. And so what I'm working on, I've called it Speederino because I'm a big Lebowski dork. Um, and the idea is that right now I'm building it for Clojure. Um,
Mm.
I'm going to transform your unit test into performance tests. It's going to be built with the Java micro benchmark harness. Turns out there's a lot of really uh, deep subtleties to benchmarking correctly. Criterium is
Yeah.
good for off the cuff stuff, but if you really need
Mm.
replicability, like so, what I want to do is given a code base, I'll look at all of the commits and then turn your unit test into performance tests and see how the performance changes over time. So I can identify cases where like you added this and it looks correct, but you're clearly something was inefficient because this function slowed down by like 100%. You're using the wrong data
Yeah.
structure, something along those lines. Um,
But
and
isn't it
it turns out,
there is a for the performance test, aren't there like more of the context? Because I'm wondering like what is your control variable is going to be, and if there are like too many confounding results, then you can't really pinpoint this is
right,
the reason. So and there might be like something that is masking like because I'm using M2 to do on my laptop
right.
with the performance thing. So yeah.
So yeah, so there's a couple issues to the replicability. Well,
Mm.
let me make sure we're talking about the same thing. Like one is
Yeah.
ensuring that like you rerun the test later and want to compare the numbers that something in the environment hasn't changed. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
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 So
Because there needs to be reproducibility, and there is a context that I need to know that yes, this is going to perform
right,
as expected based on the results. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, replicability is something I'm still working on. The basic
Yeah.
idea is just to have get your own hardware box in the cloud, make sure
Yeah.
nothing else is running on it, make sure
Mm.
it's always the same instance type. Um, that's going to be the best bet.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
will admit I still need to like figure out the numbers on this to see just how replicable it is. Especially for the
Mm.
faster unit tests, you're going to have a lot more variance just by sheer size
Yeah.
alone. But that's part of why something like Criterium would never work. It's just
Mm.
going to have a little too much variability. You also
Yeah.
need to do things like prevent safe point bias. You need to ensure that function calls are monomorphic. Like
Yeah.
the JIT compiler itself can change performance numbers if you simply
Exactly.
compile
Yeah.
some more code.
Mm.
And so the way the Java micro benchmark harness JMH handles that is by essentially forking the Java process and only compiling and running exactly the code that you're testing. And so there's no other. I mean, you can get around that if you wanted to feed it, but that's not the point. Um,
Mm.
but because literally nothing else other than like the JMH and the code you're testing is being run, that like the sites are monomorphic. Nothing else has
Mm.
been compiled that will interfere
Yeah.
with that. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's what I'm working on. It should be. should be ready for a beta soon, I think. I'm messing around a lot in rewrite CLJ-C and transforming unit test. And tricky part is getting the handling essentially like all of the fixtures, your pre and your setup and teardown. Those essentially have to be moved and transformed, and then also excluded from the analysis themselves.
Yeah. So Matthew, I mean, coming back to your, maybe I'm kind of like missed this, but coming back to your point earlier on about the transcribing and people not caring, what is the identified like audience, or what's the motivation that people have for caring about this stuff?
So the major reason for it is to avoid deploying performance issues to production. So you might have code that passes your test suite in terms of correctness, but if you weren't paying attention because your test suite takes 20 minutes to run, and then some part of it takes now takes 25 minutes, and you've introduced some performance problem, you don't want to deploy that and then find out you have a problem. And production is always going to see the heaviest loads. You're not going to detect it usually on a development machine or a staging server, unless you're specifically load testing. Now, turning unit tests into performance tests, has some limitations for sure. Unit tests are not really designed for that kind of thing. But the alternative is nobody's writing benchmark testing. Nobody's doing this to begin with.
This is certainly one dimension, right? Like the dimension that you're tackling is the unit test being converted, because obviously if you zoom out, then performance would require the whole system to be tested. Like, is the database that is going to be slow, is the network, or is it something else, or me waiting on my thread is waiting on something else to be available. So I think, but this is probably the one dimension.
This is like CI for performance. Like, with deployed servers, you're going to use something like APM, and you'll find out if a query is really slow or if some server is being overloaded. But by that point, it might be too late to avoid the problem. And so this is maybe a way of inserting another step into a parallel step in your CI pipeline that can tell you, like, hey, this function is like radically slowed down. Maybe you should double check this.
And is your kind of like, let's say, research suggesting that happens more than like dependency changes or the infrastructure changes, or like VJ says, someone writes about query, which you're not going to like run in your unit tests. What sort of percentage of performance comes from the unit tests, the sort of raw functions, essentially? My intuition is that not much, but I mean, I'm prepared to be persuaded.
Well, this could be more valuable. So, okay, I say unit tests, but a lot of people abuse unit tests for integration tests. And in that sense, it's more valuable.
Definitely.
So to the extent, so like a pure unit test, probably not. But if you shoehorned other tests into your suite, then yes, this will, and hopefully those are more ecologically valid and will represent code that you're actually running, and can give you a better idea. Like, okay, this whole retrieve customer or add product procedure has like slowed down. So, I mean, it's still a bit of an experiment. I won't know for sure until we see if anybody bites.
My unsolicited MBA shitty advice would be that you don't mention unit tests, but you say that, hey, your test suite will be used as a performance test benchmark. Then suddenly you're not talking about unit tests anymore. Because my assumption is that when you say unit test, then I'm thinking, wait a minute, when I write a unit test, then let's say I'm dealing with a smaller map in the unit test that I mocked. But in production, I've seen situations where a function taking like fucked enough time, because in production we didn't expect the map is going to have so many keys and so many things and whatever. But if I hear it's going to use unit test, but rather than it says, hey, it's a CI for performance, and it's going to take your test suite and then give you performance results, I think that has a different ring in my mind. Again, this is a completely unsolicited, like random.
No. I mean, I'm still learning things like how to write website copy too. So, I think I do mention. I think I do mention unit tests, so maybe I could just say test. We'll see.
Yeah, because I mean, when you explained it in a way, when obviously when Ray is asking like, hey, is it unit test, and when you said, wait, tests are not everybody just sticking to let me write unit test this particular small function, passing one or two,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
the quote unquote performance for those things can also be done with, at least my understanding is that using generative testing, you can actually run like a heuristic of different sizes of data, and then
Mhm.
reduce the tree and then see what is the minimal thing that is failing. I mean, it's not testing performance, obviously. It's only testing the correctness of the function using quick
Right.
check or something like that. But the if you say test suite, then like, oh, that makes sense, because usually we one of the projects that I'm working on has Redis and all of these things. So even in the test, we bring up Redis because it's super fast to bring it up, and then just test it again as that one. So it's not a
Mhm.
unit test per se. It's
Right.
actually doing the work that we want to do. So
Yeah, I'd say
makes
that's
more
actually
sense.
quite. I'd say I agree with Vijay. I think that's quite common. When you're doing like, because the way Docker works now, you can kind of do it. So it's relatively simple in these like CI systems to bring up a Docker version of the database or the search engine or
Mm,
whatever, and then essentially just write a bunch of integration queries. Using the real
yeah,
thing, even though if it's not the same scale. I
yeah,
think you would generally find quite a good performance. Yeah, quite good. That's a good source of performance measurement there, because you at least see the stack, even if you don't
Right.
see like the whole like suite of data. You will see the whole
mm.
stack through. So that could be. I
No, that's
can
a good
buy that
point.
one for sure. Yeah.
I won't use the word unit in my sales copy.
Yeah. Okay. Free consultancy from the Deaf and Boys here.
God damn it! You don't say free. I was trying to negotiate the percentage in the startup.
Okay, that's my bad.
Yeah, we'll look into the deal sheet later. Anyway, but I'm curious about the technical stuff though, because you mentioned Criterium, to do the micro benchmarking, and do you see any challenges there? Like because performance would mean that you need to run it multiple times, some statistical stuff that you need to deal with.
Yeah. So it is essentially going to be some multiple of how long it takes your test suite to execute to begin with.
Mm,
So I'm not sure that it should necessarily. I've been toying around with like, how do you report this in, your GitHub PR? Should it be a blocker?
yeah, yeah,
Probably not. Or maybe it
yeah,
could be, but it shouldn't necessarily block before it's returned. But essentially,
yeah,
yes, you do, for statistical purposes, you have to rerun, even if you're controlling everything else and nothing else is running. You can be subject to the whims of like cache and memory
yeah,
and who
yeah,
knows what. And so you do have to rerun
yeah.
it multiple times. And typically there's like a bunch of warm up runs and then like a handful of like straight up runs. And then you
Mm,
just record the timing. So
mm,
yes, yeah.
nice. So staying on the same closure side, so how did you start picking up the Aleph and Manifold and these
Yeah.
projects from Zach? Is it something like well,
So
just
this came about because this goes back to when I was still messing around with transcription tech on the side. Um,
mm,
I had used core async very heavily on the closure script side of things, but I never. It was the best of a bunch of terrible alternatives in JavaScript. Um,
mm,
but I wasn't feeling quite the same way about it in like backend closure. In particular, I never liked that it never really had like an error model. Um,
mm.
One Cognitect actually told me core async is beautiful nonsense, and I haven't forgotten that. So I started playing around with Manifold, and it did things a little differently. But for the most
Mm,
part, it worked, and I like how I didn't have to recreate the same take macro that would then throw if it got an exception for the umpteenth time. And so I was building that transcription tech very heavily in Manifold because there's a lot of like, it seemed to be a good fit. There are a lot of streams. I was like retrieving a URL from the browser side, and then I was like streaming the actual video from wherever the browser was getting it, and then
mm,
I had like a processing stream where I would extract the audio and then stream that out because all of this had to happen in real time. I needed it to happen
mm,
before you reached the point in the video where you needed to see that subtitle. And so I couldn't wait for the entire file to download. I had to do everything streaming as fast as possible. And then I would be streaming out the audio to AWS and GCP and Azure, and then collecting all of those streams. And if I'd gotten a little bit further, I was going to have to make some decisions about stale data. Like if you hadn't reported back by I don't know, 200 or 300 milliseconds before the subtitle was due to appear, I was just going to have to ignore that service. I never quite reached that point. But the point is, I was doing a lot of streaming work, and so I was getting very familiar with Manifold. And then at a certain point, Zach kind of just posted that he was moving on from Clojure and maintaining all of his Clojure libraries, and would anybody like to do something with them? And I raised my hand, as did a dozen other individuals and companies, and I was the only one who showed up. Actually, I just sort of fell into it because I needed it to do stuff, and I believed a lot in giving back to the community. That's for me what open source is about, and I've been the beneficiary of so many lovely libraries over the years, and I wanted to share. And so I started working on Manifold at first, but it quickly became clear most people were less interested in a pure streaming library and more interested in Aleph as a web server. And so I hadn't really done much Aleph before becoming lead maintainer, and it's still a massive code base. And Zach's a cool guy, but for a fellow who wrote a book about Clojure style, it's very obvious that Manifold and Aleph were written in the early days of Clojure because they don't follow a lot of his style.
Okay. Well, you have to write about your mistakes.
Shitty code to not work.
No, I mean exactly. But there's a ton of def inline usage. I had never seen that in the wild until looking at Manifold and Aleph. There's and some of the Potemkin usage is also bonkers. There's some really interesting stuff going on. And luckily, it was a bit much to handle. But luckily, as people started to see that Aleph was, things were starting to slowly happen again. Some people have, stepped up to help out. Mostly, I forget his name. So there's Arno from Exascale, and Der Grootmoritz is his handle. I'm blanking on his name for a second. But they're both at Exascale, and they've both been helping out a lot. And a few people have stepped up for other libraries like Manifold and Gloss and ByteStreams. And Eric Assam at CLJ Commons has been really helpful. So I kind of just fell into it. And then I think, did Arno suggest you talk to me, or was it somebody else? Or
it was a colleague of Arno, Wouter, who does the audio. Wouter. He works at Exascale.
Okay. Yeah, I was a little surprised, but a welcome surprise. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's a total pleasure.
We're always looking for interesting discussions anyway. So it's
always looking for chum to feed the audience.
Oh yeah,
chum for the sharks.
No, but is it just the maintenance, or do you have of course the code quality? It seems like a continuous, perpetual work in every project. Every project. None of the projects are following any guidelines to the T. So.
Yeah. I mean, a web server is a huge piece of tech, and even though it's built off of Netty, there's just a lot just for dealing with bug reports and squashing bugs.
Netty itself is quite a complicated beast, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's evolving, so
we'll see how that goes. So I was looking with what's his name, the missionary guy, Leonel, I think his name is. I forget who I was talking with last fall about, what does Project Loom mean for us doing concurrency libraries? And, it's interesting because Manifold would almost certainly not be built the way it is if virtual threads, had panned
Threads
out
working,
a
yeah.
decade ago.
Yeah.
Netty has kind of the same problem. If virtual threads really do work out the way people hope, then the entire event-driven programming is less appealing. Like if threads are literally that cheap, then we would just use Future for everything, maybe. I mean, Netty has a lot of value in the network protocols that it has, but it would almost certainly be built differently. I've toyed around with altering Manifold to speak virtual threads, but I'm not sure if it'll be worth it, honestly. We'll see. I have so many other things I need to do anyway. I got a grant from Closures Together to upgrade Aleph, and so we're going to be bringing HTTP 2 support to it. And if we have enough time, I'll try to add HTTP 3. We'll see how that goes.
But what is the main difference then between 1.1, 2, 3, 4 for people like me?
So
or just the
the biggest thing HTTP 2 brings is multiplexing over a single TCP socket. So in the HTTP 1.1 days, you were typically you would form multiple connections to a server because you couldn't reuse a connection while you're waiting for one piece. So if you're getting a video on one socket, then you can't simultaneously be requesting some JavaScript or stuff like that. HTTP 2 allows you to multiplex, and you just designate everything has a stream attached to it within the socket, and so you can send multiple pieces. If the image isn't ready, it doesn't block the whole socket. You can start sending some JavaScript that's also requested, that kind of thing. I think for most of the users, it'll be pretty invisible, except that it will probably involve less socket contention, that's for sure. I don't think most people will really see a difference. We're planning on maintaining backwards compatibility, which for the most part is a ring map. You get a request map, you return a response. The only thing Aleph really does different from standardized ring is you can return deferreds or streams, and it'll slowly stream out the bodies that way. And I plan to maintain that. If we have time, I would like to expose a lot more of the HTTP2, bells and whistles. Prioritization and flow control are the big ones. So you can say, I want this stream to be higher priority than that stream. How well that will work out in practice and how many people will use it, I don't know. I know there was an HTTP2 feature called push promises, where you can essentially send something that doesn't really have a request for it yet. So if you're sending a web page and I know they're going to need this JavaScript, I might as well just send it right now. Then you can do that before the browser actually parses the page and then makes the request. In practice, that has worked out terribly. There's some very long-winded Google analyses where they show that it is extremely difficult to get right, and that it can make things worse if you don't get your. Well, for starters, it's very cache unaware, and so if you're spending time sending something that the cache already has, it's an interesting analysis. But the upshot is Chrome actually disabled push promises, so I'm probably not going to implement that, or at least not with any high priority. Flow control would be the other big HTTP2 feature. So you can basically say, I'm willing to accept this many bytes, and then stop if you're not ready. And maybe that'll be useful for some streaming. HTTP 3, I haven't looked into too much yet. I know the big change there is the underlying transport mechanisms. So it's not using TCP, it's using UDP. And the protocol is, it inherits from Quick. I don't know if there's going to be any. Like I said, a lot of this is going to be invisible to the user. Hopefully, they'll just see that Aleph will be a little faster.
I think HTTP 3 to
me,
me
you can prove that, right? Using Speed Arena, that Aleph is indeed faster.
I am going to unleash it on Aleph when I get the chance.
Isn't the idea of HTTP 3? I mean, I agree that the The substrate is different, but the idea of changing the substrate is to make the substrate more programmable, actually. So you can innovate on top of that substrate, because that's the problem with HTTP right now and TCP in general, is that versions are stuck on the routers and they're stuck in the clients. And if you basically want to change anything, you have to change the whole world, which is very slow.
For sure. Yeah, that's part of why Google invented it. TCP has some long-standing issues dating way back. Things like the slow start, had a blind blocking issues. This was falling back to UDP, which essentially doesn't present a stream interface. It's just these packets show up whenever. We just know the destination. Quick replaces TCP, if I recall correctly. So it's going to essentially replace the TCP part and handle streaming in a more intelligent manner. That I don't know. I haven't crunched the numbers on that one.
I mean, I do see Quick showing up because I use a program to block all the network connections. So I whitelist every individual thing that my computer is making, which is really, really tedious. But I see, hey, this program is trying to connect to this server with this protocol and all that shit. And sometimes when I get suspicious, I just install like MITM thing in like Charles or something, like a proxy, to see what exactly they are sending, for no fucking reason. Because if you install any software these days, it just makes connections to, I don't know, continuously phoning home with shit. But I've seen like this Quick thing show up a lot in my logs these days. So I think people are upgrading to the protocols in the newer versions, I think.
Yeah, it's a very slow rollout. I think HTTP 2 came out in like 2014, maybe? And then HTTP 3 even more recent. But it's probably going to happen faster with the evergreen browsers.
Yeah. Because they're I mean, that's what I meant by like in the background, just they keep updating and something is running continuously. And every time you start the program, it's a new version. So
it's kind of a weird feeling to think that your computers aren't necessarily strictly under your control or yours anymore. I mean, compared to like, growing up, the computer did nothing I didn't tell it to. Maybe. And now, like, this computer's I don't recognize half of these background processes. What is this doing?
Yeah. And also, I think what I noticed is, because first of all, when I started, like you folks as well, like there is no internet to the computer. Like there is nothing. It's just computer is just standalone thingy. And now every fucking program I start, there is a perceptible delay because they have to talk to some service to start, and especially these shitty JavaScript based Electron things and everything. They have to phone home continuously. This is just ridiculous. And even all the software that they build, like we use sort of a wiki program. I don't want to name names, but the desktop of version is built by some service. So you call it todesktop.com. Like that's nothing to do with this application. And then somehow it connects to Stripe. Why? Why are you connecting to Stripe? To check my company is paying for the thing? Yeah. And the search is delegated to Algolia. There is no search happening on their own servers, and then it connects to Algolia because all the data has been shipped to Algolia, and then there's a search as a service. Yeah, God, I'm like,
it's probably waiting for micropayments. They're going to charge you per keystroke.
Exactly.
Did you hear that Ford are introducing a car that can repossess itself?
Yeah.
I heard about that.
So that's like what your computer's doing as well. That's what it's
exactly. Yeah, it just decides you can't use this shit anymore because
it's going to send someone to collect itself. You haven't paid the.
Did anybody float that idea past Vouch? I mean, when I talked with David about it, they were building, keys for virtual keys or for cars. Like, it seems like it'd be very easy.
Connect to the bank account and then check, do you have enough money? No, I'm going to block your car. Not even payment. We're going to check your bank balance already.
Actually, the biggest problem we were solving for, and it is an interesting problem, is that keys can... The problem with keys is that if you want to check their validity and you have to phone home, it's a problem if you're out in the woods. And a lot of people go
Yeah.
for camping holidays, or they go, whatever they go cross country.
Yeah.
And that was there's lots and lots of famous kind of examples, at least in that world, of keys sort of essentially bricking your car. So actually, we want to do the opposite. We wanted to make sure that that actually it would work in any circumstances, so that it was completely completely free of the internet. Once you were back on the internet, it would check to make sure your keys were still valid. But none of the car companies ever wanted, and they don't want to do this. They don't want to brick the car with a key. Now, that's not to say that they won't eventually come and get your car collected or get it to drive back to home. It's like that's different. That's an orthogonal problem. But they definitely don't like the idea of the key expiring as you're driving along the highway and then stopping the engine. That'd be super bad.
Right.
I think the health and safety people might have something to say about that.
So what I'm hearing is I should steal cars from campsites.
Definitely. Well, it's difficult to do it. That's the problem.
Well, I just have to steal it where there's no connectivity, and then yank out or just chop it up for parts.
Yeah, but they don't give keys. That's the problem. They don't give that. If you have a key, then you're kind of golden, aren't you? But they don't give physical keys. So yeah, you have to wire it up. Yeah, hot wire of the car on a campsite, then rip out all the infrastructure. Then you're good. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm taking notes. Keep going. Keep going.
He's writing in his idea journal.
This is not an endorsement by Defin or by Vouch either. So it's just
yeah.
Not that I'm an
We're completely independent media.
Either, actually.
Yeah.
Top 10 ways to steal an internet connected car.
This one weird trick will get you a free car.
Anyway, drivers hate it.
But it is a fascinating problem where you're kind of like, you've got all these kinds of problems with there's keys connectivity, and then you've got problems with batteries, because if you're in the boondocks and your phone goes out of battery, what are you going to do? You can't get into your car anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Now there are ways around this, but maybe it's just a different podcast. Okay.
That's going to be our other podcast, like how to hack your car. That's a different podcast.
I'd listen to that.
Yeah.
The Vouch people are interested in working on that stuff where, you have very low battery, very 1 year, 2 year type battery, small modules that you can use to unlock a car rather than a phone. Anyway, that's a separate, as I say, discussion, but it's fascinating for sure.
Cool. So
anyway,
coming back to this, yeah.
I need to get some lunch. Come on, guys.
So just to wrap up I think he's too late for the lunch.
I skipped lunch, to have it, and now it's getting.
See,
on 4 o'clock.
I was very clever.
I'm very sorry.
I was very clever.
Don't worry, no worries.
Yeah, but I think just to wrap it up, maybe so you started from PHP, moved to psychology, came to Clojure, and then now you're basing your startup thing in Clojure. So as a conclusive thought, what are the things that you find exciting about Clojure, and then what are the things that are shitty in Clojure right now for you? Maybe the other way around. Let's close it on the positive note. So we'll start with the shitty stuff and then close it on the positive note.
I mean, I don't know. There's some decisions that I would just do differently. I think the better decisions in Clojure are ones where a particular way is blessed or encouraged, but not mandated. So, for example, immutability, it's great. It vastly simplifies my reasoning about stuff. But if you need escape hatches, there's transients, there's atoms, or Java interop. I wish there were more of those that weren't necessarily prescriptive. I've never been a really big fan of the whole records and protocols, and some of it is that the Java underlying Java classness leaks through, and I've never liked that. But there's all sorts of random little impedance mismatches that have always bugged me. And maybe the underlying Java parts make that impossible to change. You can't use helper functions with mutable fields and def types because they can't access the field and change it. And then occasionally I butt into like code reuse issues. A fellow I'm collaborating with on Manifold is trying to bring the Manifold protocols to completable future. It's been a long-standing request people have had for years. And there's an abstract completable future type that we could use in Java, but we can't do it in Clojure, unfortunately. So I don't usually need abstract classes that I want to inherit from very often, like maybe once a year, but it irks me that I can't do it. What else?
In that case, can you like write one in Java that does it and then use that one? Is that the kind of escape hatch that could be useful? Yeah.
We've thought about that. At the moment, the guy is playing around with Potemkin's def abstract type, which is a totally crazy macro that will essentially store a lot of function bodies and then move them over to another definition. So we'll see how that works. I guess my one major complaint about Clojure, I feel like it's kind of coasting a little bit these days. I wish it were a little more vibrant. And maybe, obviously it's not a young language anymore, but I don't know. I wish there were more going on. Not all of us got bought up by a new bank and are set for life. So I have to think about hiring and other issues. So I do wish it were, growing a little bit more than it is.
I think the fact that the core team grew by 25% in the last 2 years is pretty good, but it could do with a little bit. Could do with a slight increase in that number.
But in terms of what I love about the language, it is still a deeply elegant language, and I really enjoy programming in it. I don't know that I never really felt that way about like another language. But that being said, I've also been programming with Clojure for a while, and sometimes you start to get an itch to see what else is out there. So I keep thinking, I'm going to play around with Rust for my next side project, or maybe I'll check out this Elixir thing. We'll see. But it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
I've had a look at Rust. I think VJ has as well, and I don't know. It definitely doesn't bring me any joy, but yeah.
I don't think it's the. Yeah, exactly. I don't think Rust is specifically joyful like Clojure, like the tight feedback loop. But I think the switch of the mental model that I have to make is a bit different. Like I need to rethink, and I keep hacking on smaller tools or some other shit. And I also write Python, a lot of Python as well. Which is okay.
Well, the language that I like the look of, and I've only done a little bit of programming in it, which is, in my opinion, but I'm an old C programmer, is Zig, because Zig is like definitely a better version of C in terms of its memory model and its like type systems, but it's not as mind-fuckering as Rust is. That's a technical term, with this borrowing model, which is incredibly annoying, and like very, very quickly kind of, it's like the maybe of memory models, it just expands everywhere very quickly.
For those of you reading the transcription, he did not say mind bleepery.
I think we have to use the right transcription service. Even the GPT stuff is just saying, no, I can't do that, or I am not going to tell you how I joke about a specific thing, because there are so many guardrails around AI now. So I don't think our podcast is transcriptable that easily anymore. we have crossed that correctness boundary a long time ago. Anywho, Matthew, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for taking the time, and I know you're on the other side of the world, but wish you a really, really big success with Speederino. I'm not sure if you have announced it already, or if there is a website or anything yet.
I have not. This is sort of the soft launch. Anybody who wants to check it out can go to speederino.com and add themselves to the mailing list, and I will let you know when it's ready to be tested on you.
You'll be ready to make things faster for people.
If you have the same compulsion to make things fast, look me up.
That sounds good. We'll sign up. We'll sign up today. Yeah.
All right.
We'll put it in the show
Thanks for
notes.
having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a
Thanks
lot.
very much, and great work on maintaining the
Manifold and
manifold and Aleph as well. I mean, that's just that's
I'm
thankless
just trying to
task,
keep the
but,
lights on.
yeah, well, I think we can all say that's excellent. Yeah,
yeah, totally.
good. Yeah,
Cool. On that happy note, let's say bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Defan. And the awesome vegetarian music or the track is Melon Hamburger by Pizzeri. And the show's audio is mixed by Wouter Dullert. I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. Maybe you should insert your own name here, Dullert.
Wouter.
If you'd like to support us, please do check out our Patreon page, and you can show your appreciation to all the hard work or the lack of hard work that we're doing. And you can also catch up with either Ray, with me, for some unexplainable reason. You want to interact with us, then do check us out on Slack, Clojurian Slack or Clojureverse, or on Zulip, or just at us at Defan Podcast on Twitter. Enjoy your day and see you in the next episode.